Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the 2018 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. And welcome to the Bill James Room, presented by the Action Network. My name is Corey Brumbergs. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce this panel, Trust the Process, Team Building and Rebuilding in the NBA. Our panelists today are Lawrence Frank, President of Basketball Operations for the Los Angeles Clippers, David Griffin, former General Manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers, Chris Bosh, 11-time NBA All-Star, Sam Hinkie, former General... Sam Hinkie, former General Manager of the Philadelphia 76ers, and Steve Pagliuca, the co-chairman of Bain Capital and a co-owner of the Boston Celtics. The panel today will be moderated by Howard Beck, senior writer at Bleacher Report.
Woo!
No applause.
Hey,
the panel today will last for 40 minutes, and we'll leave about 5 minutes at the end for questions. If you do have any questions, please submit them on Twitter using the hashtag #TheProcess. And with that, I'll hand it over to Howard.
Where's Daryl? I want to know if Sam just set a record for a pre-panel applause. This is the Trust the Process ? Panel. Or as I'd like to call it, finally we all get to grill Hinkie after 5 years of questions that we've saved up. Or not.
I said if we run out of things to talk about, I'll just lay on the stage and everyone can just kick me in the ribs.
They applauded for you. This is a supportive audience. But before we get to that, obviously this is a broader discussion about building and rebuilding in the NBA. But because Daryl or someone put the P word in the title, I think we should just start here. We can clarify for all time, for posterity, for history's sake. Sam, did you ever actually say the phrase, trust the process?
No.
There you go. We've accomplished at least one goal. We have set the record straight.
Hey, might I add, that's a great nickname. I'm surprised nobody came up with that nickname. I mean, you know, trust the process. You can play on that.
I was taught the more you fight it, the more it sticks. But I don't fight it, and it's stuck either way.
Whoever told you that was clearly wrong. So the reason that you have a process, any process for any team, obviously, is to build toward something, a championship, whatever success may be. So I want to actually just start there. A question for every one of you. We'll start at the end with Lawrence. What is success? But before any of you answer, you cannot say championship because the cliche is there's one champion every year. We know that. So for most of the league, most seasons, you're trying to do something else, build towards something else. So with that in mind, Lawrence, how are you with the Clippers right now defining success?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with ownership, okay? And obviously, Pags can talk on it in terms of Boston. So with Steve, the bar is very, very high. I mean, those of you who heard him talk, he says he wants a big, fat ring. And it's a heck of an ask, but that's what we're there to deliver for him. So, but I think you have to be honest about where you're at as a team. Are you truly able to win a championship? So for us, we didn't think we're a championship team this year, but we know the goal is to win a championship. So literally, every move we make, every move we think about making, has to be moving in that direction. I think the other ways you can measure success is what's the culture of your team? What's the culture of your organization? What are you going to try to beat the league at? Do you want to be known as the best player development team in the league? Your medical staff, mental performance. You know, Chris's time in Miami, I think when people say the Miami Heat, it's a very identifiable culture. The Boston Celtics, you know what they're about. So I think it is a little bit of a championship or bust mentality in the league in that there's only one winner. But I think it's all those little wins that hopefully get you to the point where you're consistently putting yourself in a position where legitimately you can be competing for a championship.
Griff?
Well, that's what happens when you ask a coach first. Lawrence was and will always be, I think, a coach at heart in terms of understanding the way the process works on a daily basis relative to the gains you make every day in practice. The culture thing he talks about is something that I was really struck by, and even prior to President Obama speaking yesterday, the thing that we took the most pride in was the fact that we had tried to build a culture where we loved each other enough to tell each other what we needed to hear. And if you can do that and hold each other accountable to something, you're going to progress in the right direction. And to Lawrence's point about ownership, if you're truthful when you purchase one of these teams and you understand that you want to be a champion, but there's only going to be one every year, and that means 29 of us are going to fail to hit that mark. If what you're really comfortable with is selling tickets at a high rate, winning 50 games and being entertaining, if that's really what's in your heart, then just say that and let somebody live up to that. And I think there's this natural tendency in sports for everybody to think that the only thing they want to do is win a championship. And Steve could certainly answer this better than I can, but I don't think that's the only reason people invest this much money in it. Part of it is it becomes an expression of joy in what you enjoy doing. It's how you're finding your own greatness. And the only measure of that cannot be winning championships, because otherwise you spent the rest of your year failing all the time if that's all you're looking at. So I think you do have to look at what would give us joy and start there, because that's the only thing that gives you the opportunity to get ownership, front office, and coach on the same page.
Chris, did you have seasons that you could define as successful that were not resulting in a championship?
Yes. I think one of the main things, the great thing about sports is that you get to go out there and compete. And, championship is the pinnacle. Everybody is chasing it. Everybody wants it. But I think one of the main things that kind of, piggybacking on prior, the joy. Having joy of going out there and playing at a high level, getting on the platform. You might not win a championship, but hey, we had a hell of a run in the playoffs. You look around and see the excitement in the city because you're competing for something. You just don't want to show up every day with nothing no goal to shoot for. And that was a huge part of one of the joys for me, is that I got to have, although very limited compared to my peers, I got the chance to play in 2 playoff series with the Toronto Raptors. Now, we only won 2 games. We only won 3. We won 3 games, but the experience that I gained from playing under pressure, for having to deliver, to having to answer tough questions after a bad performance, I would describe those as success, because you never know what you're made of until your back is against the wall, until you're put in these very tough positions, and you really have to trust yourself, trust the team, trust the coaches, the front office. You'd be amazed at what happens when, you're really stressed out.
Sam, you have different experiences with Daryl in Houston and then in Philadelphia. Were there different definitions for what defines success anywhere along the way?
I would say similar. I worked for 2 different owners, Leslie Alexander and then the Sixers group, Josh Harris and David Blitzer and the like. And I would say similar in both places, where the aspirations were very, very high. To Griff's point, like, if you're not going to win the title every year. No one's going to win them all, so that's challenging, and sometimes too high a bar. There's a lot of luck involved even in that, right, in the last step. And so often people would lower the bar a little bit. But the thing we would talk about a lot is trying to put yourself in contention where you had a reasonable shot, right? You can define that lots of different ways on how your season went or how the playoffs went. Often, like, a decent place was, are you kind of a Final Four team? Right? Did you make the conference finals in either place? And you're trying to maximize the probability of that happening over some rolling period, right? Most of us, you care a whole lot more about this year than next year, right? But your probabilities might be really, really low this year, and you're trying to boost them up over time. And those trade-offs are part of it. But it surely starts, Steve should answer this question for all of us, it surely starts with owners and how they think about this thing that they've bought, which is part amazing investment and part fun and part public trust.
Steve, does it start with owners?
Well, I think it's an important factor. It's interesting. Daryl there was one of the first people we brought in, actually, before we bought the team, to do consulting for us, and which has now led to MIT and all the good stuff that's happening here right now. And I would say that the main thing that owners need to do to win is you have to say, we called it the process, but it was a different kind of process. There was a process to build a championship team, and it's not overnight. So the big mistakes that are made is you come in you want to be relevant, so you trade for an aging player. The player has 1 year, and you win 50 games, and you'll be okay. Boston, for better or for worse, this town wants championships. We've had a lot of championships. We have 17 banners, 16. We bought the team, haunting us up there, and it's a great thing because it does create the culture that you want to win. But back to what Griff said is, I think as an owner, our whole ownership group, we really love the city, we love the team, we love the game. And so what we want to see is a long-term strategy to get a championship. You're not always going to get one, but a continuous improvement process. And you need to take the medium and long-term view to get there. If you try to win too fast or become relevant too fast, you're never really going to win the championship.
So something I was thinking about here, there's a lot of success on this stage and some championships on this stage, absolutely, and some varied experiences. But I think this always comes back to a question of what works consistently. Are there repeatable strategies here? And the one thing that obviously this always comes back to is, well, the team with 2 or 3 or maybe 4 superstars is generally the team that's winning a championship. You guys had 1. You had Pierce. You had to trade for the other 2. Griff, when you get to the Cavs, you're in a kind of a fallow period there, but you had 3 number 1s and a number 4 over a 4-year span, and then the stage was set for LeBron to want to come home because there was talent to come join. Chris, you guys built we talk about building, we usually talk about GMs and owners building. Chris, the 3 of you built a contender on your own, essentially.
So nice.
But that is a model that now has defined the last 7-8 years. So what works? Are any of these things actually repeatable? And if it comes down to just getting the most stars, how do you go about doing that? So I think this goes to Sam. I think we should start with you here. Like this was the point of the exercise to a large extent when you get to Philly, right? How do we go about getting the kind of talent that Chris and Dwayne and LeBron had as a group, that the Celtics had with their big 3? Is that the mindset you're going in there with? How do we get to that spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely trying to find the big rocks first because they matter. If you're going to fit everything in under the cap the way it works, then you're looking for a player that can really carry you, and often that's carry you for a long, long time, right? Not just for 2 or 3 years, but can be the foundation around which a team in several iterations can be built if you're lucky. And we used to say there's only 3 ways to get them: draft or trade or free agency. And when Darryl came to Houston, we laughed. We was like, there's a 4th way: to get yourself to a team that already has one. Like that's one way to do it as well. Is to but that's it. Like there's nothing else. And we talk sometimes as if there's a lot of other magic that yields to that, but there aren't a lot of examples. You just have to find a way to do it within those 3, and you can go at that any way you want. You can go at that with what's been successful more recently. You can take a long sweep across history. You can look at all the rules and think about how that'll impact the future markets. These are markets. These are human beings, grown men that get to decide where they want to play and how they want to do it. But I think a good place to start is like what's worked over time.
And did you look at anything else that had worked over time to inform your decision on how you were going to go about it in Philly?
Yeah, so I would say I think people often think everything we were doing is about the draft, and the draft is critically important for sure, but it's not. I used to work at a company called Bain & Company, and briefly at a place called Bain Capital in one of their sort of side offices. And back then, like everyone would talk about like what are the 2 or 3 levers and pull like hell on those, right? And in this case, like in Philadelphia, that was a lot of what we were trying to do. Was on all 3 of those. The draft is obviously important, and people think about that. But how do you save your resources in a place that someday if 2 players want to team up and join up with a guy you've already got in-house, you've got enough resources to do it, right? How do you have enough young, interesting players and picks to be able to make a big blockbuster trade if one comes along? If you find a disgruntled star or you find someone that fits into your team wonderfully, how do you do that? And so how do you invest in things that really appreciate over time, and how do you save some of your powder to be ready when it's your turn to strike?
Griff, if I had unplugged your computer like 5 years ago, no internet, it would be a much more peaceful existence, trust me. And you woke up today and you saw the Philadelphia 76ers had Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, Dario Saric, and the rest. Would you have said that whatever had happened there the previous 5 years had been a success?
That was to me or Chris?
Yeah, asking you.
Yeah, I think you'd have to say it was a success. And part of that depends on if I wake up in that same time span, I wake up and see all those guys on the roster, and are they winning or not? Because you can acquire an awful lot of young talent and still not win. And I think one of the things that's really meaningful in what Sam did was looking at the models that had existed before and saying, okay, this gives us the best probability of winning games, and making that the reasoning behind what you do. I think that's the most important thing we do in all sports, is mimic the people that are successful and figure out what they did to be successful and try to recreate that. So yeah, I absolutely think you'd have to look at where they are now in the standings.
But Griff, you have to compare that. You have to compare that to what would have been another process, a different process, right? So to say, it's relative success.
It is.
And I don't think. You say you didn't invent the process, and so I'm not going to tag you with the process. But if you strip it down and you say it's all about getting a good spot in the draft, it then affects other variables, which is, are you going to have a base of players to bring free agents in to say, well, we have a couple of good players here. If it's all about the draft, you probably get rid of, all your good or good to be role players and try to get a good draft pick. But then it's harder to bring free agents in. So every piece of I think as Sam knows, every piece of the equation affects things in a different way. So the question is a process of totally trying to get draft picks, is that a better process than having a mix of the three other ingredients? And I would argue that the three other ingredients is a better mix to me. Try to get some good role players, take a third pick instead of a first pick, because when you do the odds, you're never guaranteed to getting the first pick anyway. It actually doesn't happen a lot. And now, since they've changed the lottery, it's going to be even lower odds. So a system of just focusing on the draft choices is a little bit like, saying that pizza is good and all you eat is pizza, and you eat 1,000 pounds of pizza and it kills you. It's good, it looks really good while you're eating it, but then it kills you. So I think you have to compare it to a kind of a triple threat approach with patience versus totally trying to get draft picks. And I don't know if he was totally trying to get draft picks or not, and I'm not tagging you with the process, but you have to look at what you would have been versus what you would have been doing it a different way.
I don't disagree with that, and I think the reason that I'd be comfortable saying it was a success is because of how much they're winning and how much flexibility they have to continue to add the pieces you're talking about. So no harm has befallen them to this point. And you've seen a lot of teams rebuild over a 5-year period and put themselves in position where they're not going to get any better. And they are entirely dependent upon the kids that they drafted. And where I think Philadelphia has done something really meaningful is they've put themselves in position with elite talent to win in the here and now and still have financial flexibility to continue to add to it in the future, and can take advantage of that three-prong approach, because I think you're absolutely right. It takes all of that to win.
Chris, if you're an all-star in your prime and you see a team going through not just what Philly went through with that period, but there obviously any given year there's a bunch of teams that are in some state of disrepair, rebuilding, restructuring, whatever. Would you have looked at a team like that and said, when it was time for them to say, okay, we're going to now go out in free agency, because there was a period where the Sixers were not really active in free agency, would you have looked at that team as a player and said, you know what, I'm a little scared by that?
With the team that they have currently?
No, with where Philly was during that losing period where they're just trying to build up what they now have.
Yeah, that'd be a tough decision, man. Yeah,
the max deal is sitting there on the table.
Look, my experience with Toronto, and that sounds like Toronto to me, because I lost way more games than I won. I remember thinking, and we all kind of go through this as athletes, is thinking like, oh yeah, we're going to be great, we're going to be a good team. My second year to my fourth year, well, my second and third year, we were not very good. And in that time, even years afterwards, we would try to get players. I felt that we had a good chance to win. I felt that Toronto was a great place to play. I felt that guys would want to play with me and the guys that were there. And year after year in free agency, no offense to the guys that we signed, but we were disappointed because there was somebody else out there. I remember John Salmons was up. He was a free agent. And we had a mid-level exception. And he chose to take less money to go to Chicago, and we had a better record, actually. So, it's just, I guess it comes down to preference of the player sometimes. And you never know what a person wants. They might not want to play winning basketball, or they might not want to be located far from their home, or they might not. I mean, it's so many different moving pieces to get to get a guy to buy into what your vision is, or they might not even agree with your vision, with the front office's vision, and say, hey, I want to win now. I kind of see your vision, I see the thing, but I can't put my faith in drafts. Same thing with Vince Carter with me. I remember he was kind of upset because they didn't trade the pick. We had a 4th pick, he wanted to trade it. He went on TV and said it. And they picked me, and it ended up working out good. But it's just sometimes the mentality of a player is different, and they might not see, just like I was saying earlier, there's so many different ways to get there, and there's so many different moving pieces. A guy might think he knows what he wants, and it might ended up being the best decision he made if he would have went to Philly. He'd be paired with Ben, he'd be paired with Joel and the process.
A process.
Worked out great. Yeah, no, you can never know. I mean, it's you never know what can happen.
So we're in an era now where, and I was just having this conversation with someone earlier, like there's a very much this kind of championship or bust mentality that's not just among teams, it's among fans. Like fans embraced the process, a lot of them in Philly, because they understood what the goal was. The goal was get superstars, be a contender. It makes a lot of sense. Not every team has of course, gone that way. There are a variety of different things. We've seen different models. Milwaukee never wanted to do the complete tear down, and they still happened into a star at the 15th spot in the draft in Giannis. The Pacers have always taken an approach where they were just going to try to just stay in the playoffs and then hopefully get lucky to go to a couple of conference finals. So there's always, not everybody's going championship or bust. Lawrence, your team was put in the unenviable position of having 3 All-Stars, one of whom decides, I'm done, I want out. He goes off to Daryl. And so now you guys are left with some decisions to make immediately about whether to re-sign Blake first and what else to do to kind of pick up from there. And then midseason you make another change anyway. After having re-signed Blake, you decide to move him. But you guys didn't move everybody. This was not the tear down. Give us a sense of how a team is deliberating how far down to go, and how the balance between that and staying relevant in a city where obviously there's a lot of competition for attention among sports fans. How do you?
What are you saying about LA sports fans?
They might be fixated on another
New York
franchise.
bias. Well, I tell you what is obviously when Chris decided that he wanted to leave LA and go to Houston, you're left at a pivotal moment in your franchise, and there's a number of different pathways you can choose to go. And the one thing that I've learned from making the jump from coaching to the front office is the amount of respect that I have in terms of the decisions that Sam and Griff made. Like, you study the models, you study the history, you try to learn the do's and the don'ts. And I think like what Sam did in Philly makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And as a coach, it would be harder to grasp until I shifted over to this. Because the reality, and I'll answer your question, is when you look at getting those franchise players, when you study the last 10 champions, the top 3 players, 18 of those 30 were drafted. Now, it's unique because Chris and LeBron were free agents, right? LeBron did it again. So he's 2 of those 5 free agents. The other 7 were through trade. So it makes a lot of sense. For us, the model that we kind of looked at was Boston, Houston, Miami, San Antonio, in the sense that our owner, as much as he respected in terms of bottoming out, and it wasn't like he was totally against it, his feeling was, I want to stay competitive with our marketplace. And you look at, Boston, Houston, Miami, if they only were out of the playoffs maybe 1 year, but they stayed competitive. So I think it made a lot of sense for us to re-sign Blake. We added Danilo Gallinari. We made some other free agent acquisitions. The guys we got back from Houston both fit what we're defining as a Clipper. And yet, we had a ton of injuries to start the year. We saw our entire group play together for a game and a half. And yet, we have to make huge decisions. We have other guys who are going to be free agents. And the league doesn't allow you to take a mulligan. It says, oh, hey, look, you've had a ton of injuries. Wait, you can start it all over. So we had to make a hard decision. We traded Blake. And yet, when we traded Blake, innately, players, staff, fans, well, what are you doing? Are you starting at the bottom? No, no, no. We're going to still be a hard-playing, tough, high IQ team. And the way you do that, that's the composition of your team. You know, like, always got a kick out of saying, we're going to be a hard-playing team, and you got a bunch of guys that don't play hard. Like, it can't happen. I don't care. Like, we have a championship coach in Doc. He can't, sprinkle pixie dust on guys that aren't going to play hard. So now I think the question is kind of what you talked about with some of the other teams. When you're in the middle, how do you get out of it? And I think, look, you have to be fortunate. You have to draft well. Like, Steve Nash sat on this panel. What number was he picked? 15th. Okay? Giannis, 15th. Kawhi Leonard, 15th. Like, you have to be able to nail it. Donovan Mitchell, right? He's 13th. So it's obviously the odds are greater if you get a top 5 pick, but we decided as an organization we want to stay competitive, and yet we needed to increase our flexibility, and we also knew that we needed to add younger players and draft picks to the pipeline.
So you just...
And I'll just piggyback if that's all right. I think that's one of the things that's kind of missing, in today's game, just the competitive nature. I think that's, the most important thing to possess as an athlete, because you're going to have to play every night. The coach is going to ask you to do some things probably you don't want to do as far as defensive rotations and, in my case, passing the ball. And, you want to be competitive. You want to win. I know championship isn't everything, but, it's tough for me to say it's not, because since I was a kid, that's all I ever thought about. That's all I ever wanted to do. And I think everybody in this room, you want to win. You just don't want to just show up and, get your butt handed to you every weekend. You want to win, and you want to be successful at the things that you're doing. That doesn't mean you're going to win every year, but aspiring to accomplish that goal, to be competitive, to have that philosophy and say, hey, we can, our philosophy is we're going to play hard. We're going to push our guys. We're going to make sure that they keep that competitive spirit. So when we do have a chance to get a big fish, he'll remember automatically, like, okay, I remember playing against this guy, this guy, this guy. I remember coming in here. It was tough playing in here. You want to be a part of a culture like that.
In defensive Sam, I think the media took some reasonableness in his strategy and then probably pushed it out to the far end. You were doing other things, I think, than deciding just to lose every game. Some of the trades you made, I think you traded some players that probably you got better draft picks for than the players, right? But yeah, I like to say that I actually don't think statistically the process as the media's defined it works, because there just isn't enough good odds to get the great player, and so if you really bottom out, you still have first of all, you have to get the pick. You have to win the lottery. Second of all, there has to be a great draft that there is a LeBron. And there's plenty of drafts where, the ninth player in one draft is as good as the first player in the next draft. So when you do all the odds, purely going that direction, to me, is a bad strategy, because you preclude the other options of bringing in role players, or bringing in good players that can be in a championship team, because the odds just don't stack up. I think even statistically. So I don't think by definition the process as defined by losing all you can for 4 or 5 years in a row is actually the way to get to the promised land.
It's not something you would have signed up for as an owner if somebody had proposed that to you, it sounds.
I don't think it's the right strategy. I don't think it has the risk reward is not correct. If you told me that you had a 70% chance of getting the first pick by being the worst team in the league, then I would say clearly that's the case. But now it's down to 14, and even at 25, would you bet your life on 1 and 4, and then add on top of the fact that it might be a bad draft?
So this is what I think this.
I want to jump in for a second. I think it's worth talking about the Boston model because I think the Boston model is super interesting in a whole bunch of ways. One of which is because I hold Danny Ainge in like really high regard and think he's really incredible. But I think largely a lot of the issues we have with this is a really short-term view of this week or this month or last week or last month and what that's felt like, and we'll just find those 2 data points and extrapolate forever that it will never change, right? And so if you look at Boston, like Boston had this amazing ceremony for Paul Pierce the other day, right? Just seemed incredible. I watched it. I thought it was great, right? And in the front row is KG and Paul and Rajon and Doc, right? And those guys are all amazing and did amazing stuff in the last run for the Celtics. But one of the advantages that I think we forget is the great Danny Ainge stood on the shoulders of a great GM that preceded him in this last rebuild named Danny Ainge, right? And so while those guys sat and their playing days are over and we're celebrating, Kyrie played. He was out there, and they live in him because they actually got him. Like Rondo became Jay Crowder, right? And Jay Crowder is in the deal, right? And Paul and KG become these picks, and one of those picks is in the deal. Like, and it's not just Kyrie, Jason Tatum, right? Over and over and over, like all of Jaylen Brown, like lots of these players have come from the prior regime and standing on good decisions, and those are standing on good decisions from the great Danny Ainge from before, right? Kendrick Perkins becomes Jeff Green, becomes a pick. Al Jefferson, Gerald Green becomes KG. You win a title, you go to the bottom, you get the picks, you do it again. Like, that's genius and really hard to do. And to your point, takes a bunch of strategies because Isaiah's one of those, right? Find Isaiah and it was amazing, right? Find Isaiah who disgruntled in Phoenix and turn one of those picks. Danny beat me to that pick. I was trying to get that pick like hell from Billy, right? And Griff called me trying to sell it to me. And Danny beat me to it.
What
and he
is
turns around and
Danny
uses
saying?
that pick for Isaiah.
What is
which
Danny
all
saying
fits
in
together.
these meetings? That's what I want to know because, like,
Ask Griff. He worked.
yeah,
with him.
yeah, you know, just to your point, you know, you named off the last 4 years of his moves, and they still, how many first-round picks do they have? They have another one? I want to know what he said.
You know, Chris,
I want to talk to the guys that he did the deals with because, again, they've got another pick. Then they get Kyrie. It's like, what's going on? And then, you know, they can turn these picks into Jason Tatum. They have the opportunity. You guys have the opportunity to be sitting right there after this year and, you know, compete at a high level, have a superstar player coming back, and have a draft pick on top of that, and have a draft pick on top of the Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who have done phenomenally well. And I mean, man, where's Danny Ainge? I need to talk to him.
I'm telling you, Danny Ainge was almost not a Celtic. I think, as Daryl knows, he was a good friend of mine before the Celtics, and I called him when we purchased the team and said, "I'd like to talk to you." We used to talk a ton about basketball, being friends on the Steve Young Foundation, and so Danny said, "Here's 5 names." We talked for 5 hours about basketball. Danny can talk about basketball, by the way, 23 hours a day. So you have to bring a lunch pail and everything. Go in there. You can talk forever. He's amazingly facile with every aspect of the game. But anyway, so he set up a meeting with me to fly out to Phoenix and golf with a potential GM candidate. And he picked me up at the airport, and he said, "I've been thinking about this, and you know, I think I want to drive around for a while." I said, "That's kind of crazy. Okay, we'll drive around Phoenix for a while." He said, I've been thinking about this. I want the job." And he wanted the job because he wanted to come back and compete and bring the Celtics back to, you know, where he was at. And I think what your point is making is the continuity is critical. You know, Boston's had huge continuity in the organization since we've been there. It's almost exactly the same guys have been there. And so you learn from mistakes. You have the full backing of the management. We've only had a couple of coaches, you know, Doc Rivers and Brad Stevens, and Brad Stevens signed long-term. So this continuity gives people the flexibility to say, okay, I'm going to pursue this strategy to its furthest, and I don't have to make the short-term move because I'll get fired tomorrow. So part of this, Danny Ainge is a fantastic basketball genius, no question about that. Part of this for all of us is luck, as all these guys know. If Paul Pierce doesn't get up off that thing and get wheeled back out in the game 5, we don't have any championship, okay? He played on a sprained ankle. So part of this is luck. And as Red Auerbach said, when we went to Red, remember we went to Red and said, what do you think about Danny Ainge? He said, I think you ought to hire him. We said, why? What's his greatest strength? He said, he's lucky.
All right, so I'm glad that at least a few people up here have acknowledged the role of luck here, which I don't think is probably talked about enough in this league. That luck and some randomness and superstars that were acquired that you couldn't have known were even going to be available one day, all of a sudden are on your team the next. And if no one's available to trade for, then all of Danny's cache of picks doesn't mean anything anyway. So there's all these other factors, and Lawrence lays out what the Clippers are going to do, trying this other way. So let's get back to odds. The odds of them succeeding by trying to draft 15th, we know, aren't really that great, even though Giannis and Kawhi and all these guys went there. So because Sam's not going to defend himself to something you said, Steve, I'm going to for a minute. What Sam did over a span there was to increase his odds by being in that range over and over and over again, because then you take some of all that randomness and chance out of it. Daryl says earlier today that the league as a whole is drafting worse now, or is getting worse at the draft. So we know over time that top 1, 2, 3 picks, that's where you find your stars. So Sam, back to you on this then. What worked? I mean, what worked and what didn't?
With what we did?
With what you, Steve is saying he wouldn't go that route, and he's saying he doesn't actually even think it works. What worked?
No, first of all, I said I don't think Sam went that route that you're saying he went exactly.
Right. As we have framed
he
it.
answered that himself, but
what worked? What didn't?
Yeah, I would say we have several things you can point to that were successes and several things you can point to that were misses, right? And I think to lionize the opposite is silly. Like, Obama said yesterday, like, the decisions that come to you that you have to make in a probabilistic way, right? That you're not going to get them right 90% of the time. By the way, pick high, you get more right, right? Than pick low. You have a wider set of options to choose from, so that helps. But yeah, I think Philly has a number of players right now and a number of options and a number of paths going forward, and I don't think they can predict exactly what will happen. They don't know exactly who will stay healthy. They don't know exactly who will develop. They don't know which free agents they'll be able to get, and they don't know what choices they'll make this July. If they get this free agent, that'll mean a whole bunch of things. If they get a different free agent, they'll go a whole bunch of other ways. But like, this kind of flexibility is necessary to be able to not be too path dependent on any one thing that you run into a dead end and you're done, right? That guy goes down, oh, it's all over, and you're done. I suspect Danny, for as brilliant as he is, couldn't have mapped out where he is now, but what he could map out is when the next guy is angry, I'll be there, right? And we will decide what he's worth, and we will decide if we want to pay the price, because we can pay the highest price of anyone, right? And so one of the things I bet he was deciding, which no one's talking about now, is like, was that the right move? The big last move they made in August, was that the right one, right, for now? Because if it's available, everyone's super excited in the city, but then he'll have more down the line. If he would have said no to that and kept Isaiah and kept all of his stuff, he would have had more coming down the line. And we're not done yet. There'll be other players that get to the point in their career that they're like, I want to go somewhere and win. Like, let's do it and make it happen. I think that's definitely part of it.
The league has adopted lottery reform that I would say was spurred largely by, or in large part due to what you guys were doing in Philly for a while there. That was a reaction to it. There were other lottery reforms that they tried and failed to pass a couple of years ago. So it goes into effect in 2019, and now it's going to be flat at the top. Was it 14% for the 1, 2, 3?
Yep.
Okay.
And it only goes down to like 10 by the 5th
Right.
or 6th.
For everybody, will it work? But I'll start with you, Sam. Will it work? Would it have changed how you operated when you first got to Philly if those odds were in place then?
Yeah, I think you're always looking at the whole range of paths that are available to you and what's worked in the past and what's likely to work in the future on all these decisions. And so if the plan is save money for a free agent, like there's lots of past history we can look at of how likely that works. You save money for a free agent, and what do they decide on and how do they pick where they're going to go? What we don't see, no one talks about it, but what we don't see is, take Kevin Durant as an archetype because he's amazing, is Kevin Durant, I mean, he's the best in the world, or close, right? Really close.
It's pretty good.
At what he does, and he gets all the way to the point where he can make the first truly rational decision for himself with several $100 million in his pocket. People like that, and we know some other people like that in other realms, they don't think like, I'm going to take a 20% haircut and go play by myself. Just go play somewhere where I'm the only guy. right? He was in a great situation. He's only going to a situation where he's going to have stunning colleagues that are amazing, that he knows in his heart of hearts, like, me and this dude, we're good. We're good, and like we can win, right? Or in his case, me and this dude and this dude and this dude, right? Right? Like we're going to be a really good team. Like but we took ourselves. I feel like when Griff was in Cleveland, it was the opposite. That when LeBron left Cleveland, everyone just agreed, and all the media, and so every fan agreed, well, a player's not going to go to Cleveland, right? So free agency isn't possible, and so we'll write that to zero, and so you'll do these other things, right? I think everybody ought to start writing the probabilities of that dude coming to your city and all these other cities too, if he's the first one in the door. Because I don't think people are going to be super excited to take a 20% haircut to come to this place where the situation is maybe not any better than they are. If they can find young, stunning colleagues to play with, Kyrie and Love, like, ooh, that's interesting.
Well, I think part of it too really depends on to what's being said about Danny Ainge and leaving Mike Zarin out of that would be silly too. What they've done over time from a sustainability standpoint is really impressive. But I think one of the biggest reasons for it is that you also have Brad Stevens coaching the team. And so during the time that you were going through this most recent rebuild and this growth process, you were doing it within the framework of accountability to one another and an overachieving sort of ethos that Boston became known for. And your culture is what attracted Kyrie Irving to want to get traded there. Brad Stevens is why Kyrie wanted to be there. And so while you're going through the process of building all of this flexibility and trying to do all the right things, you need to be building the kind of environment that will attract that next guy.
Sure.
And Boston did that well too.
Well,
so
it started with Doc. I mean, Doc was he's a fantastic, as Lawrence knows, a fantastic leader, and we had players that wanted to come to play for Doc as well. Paul stayed with us, and we said we'd get some players in here and some draft picks, and Paul stuck with us. But you know, Doc was also attracting players to want to be traded to us or want to come to us. So
yeah, and to your point about standing on the shoulders of the great Danny Ainge. So Brad Stevens is something that we owe to Danny Ainge as well, and to Mike. And obviously Doc being there and now Doc being with you, guys are attracted to certain things like that, and it's not market dependent. Sometimes it's what you've created in whatever market you're in, and it's really, really important to be doing those things every day.
So we're winding down here. We want to get to a couple of questions from Twitter. Someone asked, is it possible to build, maybe we'll just go down the line real quick. Is it possible to build a contending team without a top 5 to 10 player? Lawrence.
Detroit Pistons. I mean, you know, they did it. You know?
They're the outlier, though,
and
right?
it's almost like the ultimate dream. I mean, look, everyone knows that history says you need at least 2, if not 3 superstar players. But Detroit legitimately did it in recent history. You can make a little bit of an argument. Dallas, potentially. You know, I mean, Dirk is obviously a first ballot Hall of Famer. But maybe during that year, I don't know. But it's, you know, those are the outliers. The one thing I just want to back up, Sam, isn't it true during the 4 years, you guys only had the worst record 1 year of those 4, right? And no one talks about those other teams. You know, it's an amazing thing, right? Like you would imagine. The one other thing I just wanted to say with it is your market also determines some of the different levers you can pull. Like in LA, we feel really strong we're going to be a very good free agent destination. So the draft is important, but it's not of the utmost importance. But to answer your question, I think it can be done. It's extremely difficult, but I think the Pistons are a clear example that you can do it.
Griff, Sam, would you both agree?
I'd agree as long as, you know, if you don't have a top 5 to 10 guy and they're ready to get in the bar fight to win the finals, then those are your guys. You know, that's kind of what it comes down to. Kind of speaking earlier what I was saying, just being competitive. You know, if you've got, you know, building the culture around your guys, you've got a great coach, you've got a great organization, and you don't have a top 5 or 10 player, and you make it to the big stage, as long as you compete, that's what it's about. You go out, if you've got guys that are just going out there and they're not worried about saying, oh, we don't have a top 3 player, we're gonna, you know, we're gonna compete, we're gonna go out here, we're gonna play hard, and we're gonna win it, and we believe in ourselves. I think that's more important than anything else. And yeah, just like you see with the Pistons, and arguably you can put the Spurs in there too, because, you know, they have a Tim Duncan who's in the twilight of his career, and he's out there still killing it.
Let's try to squeeze in one more here. How do you know when you found a star worth building around for anyone?
When you've got me, man.
That is the best answer.
Nobody said anything. I felt I had to.
As long as you get a player from Duke, get some players from Duke.
I really do think one of the things that's a telltale sign is you have a guy who makes other people better. And those are destination players. Steve Nash was not somebody that most people would have told you was a top 5 player in the NBA when he came back as a free agent to Phoenix. But he was a guy that attracted the kinds of people you wanted on your team because they wanted to play with him because of everything he represented. And so I think you've got a guy that you can build around when they're the type of people that can carry the game on their own but make everybody better.
All right. Well, the clock is at zeros and the red light is blinking, and I'm getting a message that says wrap up, thanks. So we're wrapping up. Thanks for sticking with us to the bitter end here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take just a few minutes and turn around the stage and get ready for our Alpha Awards. Our Alpha Awards will be starting in just a few minutes. So stick around, don't go far at all. We'll be starting our Alpha Awards in just a few moments. Thank you.